大家好. Gemini is called Mithuna, which refers to the couple. The word Mithuna in Sanskrit is usually used in the context of a romantic couple, so it's a man and a woman in close embrace. Therefore, Gemini represents lovers, whorehouses, and any places where people are embracing. Mithuna can also simply refer to a pair of people, okay? In fact, the Brihajataka tells us that the two people are a man with a club and a woman with a lute, right? Gemini can also be seen as a pair of humans, one male and one female. And the woman is developing her artistic abilities, by playing the lute, and the man is developing his destructive abilities by carrying a club. So the idea of Gemini is that it represents the human potential to both create and destroy. Gemini is the human sign of a couple that wants to be together, right? The couple is said to live in a village. Now, that means that they want to be around other people, right? The rocky places of Aries, these are places that no one but the Aries person wants to go there. But the village of Gemini is a place where they can connect to as many people as they want. And nowadays, that basically translates to Gemini being the big city sign, right? When people have important planets in Gemini, they like living in cities, right? If they have afflicted planets there, then they might get stuck living in cities. They might not like living there, but somehow or another they have to live there anyway. But Gemini is the big city sign, right? In fact, Gemini is the biggest cities on Earth. Taurus is also, cities as well, but those are more smaller cities where it actually makes sense to live. Right? When you're in a smaller town, or let's say, a mid-sized, town, the amount that you get paid and the amount that it costs to buy real estate is relatively sensible. And when you move into the big cities anywhere in the world, whether it's, in Paris, London, or Beijing, the cost of real estate is so high compared to the income you get in that city. But when you live in sort of a mid-sized town, the income is going to likely be the same, but the real estate costs half as much, okay? And that's a huge difference in your quality of living, and Taurus is going to choose that, whereas Gemini will prefer the big cities. Mithuna can also mean twins in Vedic astrology, and so we also consider a Gemini as a sign of twins, but we don't look at it as exclusively being a sign of twins, right? For us, Gemini is a couple. It's a man with a mace and a woman with a lute. And the woman with the lute represents the creative aspects of Gemini, and the man with the mace represents the destructive aspect of Gemini. And it is those two aspects that really attracts people to the big cities, right? There's all these cultural activities going on in the big cities, right? People are creative, there's performers and artists, and so many other things. And especially if you, want to sort of make a name out of yourself through your creativity, then, you have a much bigger audience, population, and clientele there. But then there's also this part of living in a big city that's really destructive, right? Because big cities are polluted, right? The water quality is not that good, the air quality is not that good, and big city life can therefore be really hard on the body. And even in the old days, living in a big cities is where the diseases were most rampant, actually, because of a lack of hygiene. Now, of course, even these days, there's more hygiene, but living in a big city when there's heavy diseases going around can actually also be quite difficult, right? So big cities are in lots of ways the most destructive and unhealthy places to live. But Gemini is okay with that because they have that destructive quality to them, and it doesn't really bother them. Gemini is the big city sign where people can connect to whatever they want. And people with strong and healthy Gemini influence in their horoscope, they love living in the big city because they can experience anything that they want, right? If they want to meet certain people, if they want to learn something, there's all this opportunity in the big cities, right? People are offering so many courses on, let's say, cooking, on languages, on learning instruments, right? You can basically learn anything in a city. There will all these professionals that are gonna teach everything. And you can also go to shopping malls, cafes, galleries, museums, and so on, right? You can experience a huge variety of things. Of course, along with being able to experience so many things, one also has to experience those more destructive things, right? But the person with a healthy Gemini won't mind, right? They love living in the big city. The woman with the lute and the man with the club, they really represent that quality of Gemini that is both artistic and destructive, or that is creative and also protective. And these are actually the two basic human qualities that might even summarize the history of mankind, right? If you study the ancient, history, if you study the history of countries, basically, you will find always these two major themes, really. One is that of amazing artwork and, creative expression, while at the same time, there always sort of has to be, there has always been conflict, okay? And people crowd together in communities, that grow into these big cities, they create their own culture, but then there are conflicts with other people and their culture. And as a result, there's, war where one country is trying to conquer another one. And this is another result that we can really see, from city life and, and how, how in that city life, we get sort of this creative and artistic aspect, but also this destructive aspect as well. And Gemini is the man with the club and the woman with the lute living in the city. And more than anything else, Gemini likes to connect with other people. Gemini is the most social sign. It wants lots of people around. And if there's not lots of people, it always wants at least one person around, because it is a man and a woman together, right? It's two people together. And Gemini likes togetherness and company more than any other sign. And so if you see healthy planets in Gemini, then a person, they have very nice company and they have very solid friendships. Right? They feel like they belong to someone else or to other people, and they have their network of friends, their siblings, their teammates, and all those people will be important to them. Right? They are productive and creative with them or alone, and when it's required, then they can also, then they're also able to sort of fight and deal with the harsh realities of life too. Right? But if Gemini is afflicted, then a person has a hard time sort of being creative, and they might be very actually frustrated with their creativity. Right? And they can actually also be more prone to violence or self-destructive behaviors. So anytime that a person asks you whether they should live in the city, look at Gemini, right? If Gemini is afflicted, then say no, don't live in the city, right? If Gemini has nice planets there, then yes, live in the city. And the same you can actually do with any of these other places, right? If a person asks about moving out of the big city into a town, let's say, right, then look at Taurus and see how they would do living in the town or a small city. If they want to live in a less habitable place, right, a hard environment, a rocky place that's not showing much promise, right, where most people just won't go there, then look at Aries and see if they have the ability to find the treasures there and enjoy living there.